Hello Power Rankings fans, welcome to today's video where we're going to be doing something very similar to what we did in the European version of this, where we take the top 16 teams that qualified for the OWCS Swiss stage and rank them from 16th all the way up to first. Now, we're not going to go into the full detail of each group, who we think will get out of each one, but hopefully by doing this, it will give you a pretty good indicator of who I think will get out of each respective group. Now, we'll jump straight into it because once again, for all the spreadsheet heads, we've got a pretty good looking spreadsheet, same format as the previous one. So we've got all our teams on the left. They are currently in the order in which they qualified. So seed first at the top, seed 16 at the bottom. We've got all our rosters, tanks in green, DPS in pink, and supports in blue. Now, we've got a few, it's a little bit longer. We've got a lot bigger rosters on a lot of these North American teams, so we've got a bit more to factor in. We'll start at the bottom, and admittedly, I have to say, my knowledge of the NA scene probably isn't quite as deep as that of the EU scene, so we might have to do some making assumptions and some filling in the blanks here as we start at the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to really prioritize essentially brand recognition. Whose names do I recognize? Whose players do I therefore have a bit more faith in to perform well when it comes to this tournament? So that means, unfortunately, for Shikigami and Daybreak as well, I'm not going to recognize a huge number of their players, and therefore I'm actually going to drop them into these bottom spots, unfortunately. Now, there weren't as many round robins compared to the size of entries compared to Europe, so it's possible, and I really think the round robin didn't quite sift through the teams in quite the same level of detail as it did in Europe. So I think these teams will actually finish a lot lower than they originally did. Now, then I'm going to drop in Final Gambit, and you might be wondering, why do I think Final Gambit are going to jump up so much? Well, they've got 2 Korean imports. They've used all their import spots on Koreans. And if there's one thing I know, Koreans are good at Overwatch, and therefore automatically jump into the top of these lesser known lists. Now, then we're going to get to maybe Citrus Nation, who have a few players who I do recognise, especially Z-Man, who was potentially going to be on Ex-Oblivion in Europe at one point, Erikek as well, who's competed in Saudi League and Contenders. But I still think the team is going to be on the weaker side, and I'm going to put them, maybe actually I'm going to put them in here. And then actually it'll be the Garchomp team, I'd win. I think also going to do a little bit better. I mean, they do have a player called Mayhem who has a 3 of these names. So we know he's a gamer. We know he's good at games because of that. But there's not enough else about this roster, and that gives me as much faith at this moment in time. Then I think we're going to get to Timeless Obsidian, who also were jumped up a little bit in the standings by some of the disqualifications. And while they have a lot more recognisable names in terms of Tread, who's played off-tank very much in Europe, trialed for Team UK, didn't quite get in, but was very much on the cusp. We also have Dynasty and Dove. I think it's potentially, the way the meta is shifting, it might start favouring Dove a little bit more. If they can get more hit scan heroes, maybe there's a little bit of a bump up here from Timeless Obsidian. So maybe a chance to creep up the rankings for them. Alright, we can scroll up a little bit now. And I think now we get to a sort of category where I think teams like Dreamland, Pirates in Pyjamas, Bang Bang Pow Galaxy all start to fit in. Again, we see more recognisable names from contenders. I think at the moment I'm going to be putting Dreamland a little bit lower. I'm not as convinced by some of their roster, and there's a few more holes where I don't recognise players. I think while Astronix and Cowman are both tanks we've seen do okay at the World Cup and contenders respectively, and X10 has also done well. I still think the names on the other rosters give me a little bit more faith that they'll be getting a higher finish at this point in time. So, going to then divide these next two. And I think actually Bang Bang Pow Galaxy, we've got some of the Valiant players. And while on Valiant, it was mainly Seeker and CJ that people really rated highly. I actually think Nos was a player who did pretty well at Tracer, given the overall situation his team was in, and was actually quite impressive. So I'm going to probably put them above Pirates in Pyjamas right now in this 8th place spot. And that means Pirates in Pyjamas do sit maybe just outside that top 8, might not make it. But I think there's still potential for them there, especially if they get someone like Strider onto Ball or something. They can maybe cause some problems. But I don't know how possible that really is with Ball in the current meta. Then as we enter the top 8, I think Beluga's platoon, even though they actually finished 4th seed overall, I'm not sure I can really see them matching that in the same way. I think a lot of the other teams, we're now really getting into players with pretty good depth of talent, with a nice hero pools from this meta. So I'm not sure I can see Beluga's platoon finishing as highly as they did in the Swiss. So they're going to drop in here at 7th. And now we're starting to get into the real meat of the matter. At 6th, I think I'm going to lean towards Students of the Game right now. I think while there is some talent, I know lots of people are big on PGE, Infected, Cal, obviously, despite maybe not the Overwatch League debut we would have hoped with the Gladiators, still very much a solid flex support, great aim, rack attack as well, experienced player, very much stacks up alongside a lot of these other main supports we see. But I think they're just outmatched at this point in time. So they're going to be dropping into 6th, and this is now where we really get to the remaining kind of top 5 teams. I think obviously Toronto, Timeless, M80, Luminosity all going to be up here, as are obviously LFO, who were formerly WD40. And now when we get to this section of it, I think there's a situation right now where WD40, or now looking for org, aren't actually in a great situation for the meta. I think it means they can't get the most out of Seeker. If the meta does shift a little bit more to maybe a tank swap meta, maybe that suits someone like Mirror, maybe they can get Seeker on hit scan more. But with the American meta still sitting quite Doom Tracer Echo at the moment, I think I find it hard for LFO to really compete on the same level. So I think for now, they're going to be the 5th place team for me. Then once we get to our top 4, I think everything gets a little bit closer, very competitive. Timeless have been a team that have been around this for quite a while. I like a lot of their roster. I think Rocket and Chopper are really highly talented players who never got the shot at Overwatch League. I think CJ is one of the best flex supports. Normally when people talk about the best flex supports in America, they always talk about RuPaul and they always talk about UV. But I think CJ is right behind both of these players here. So I think even though I'm going to put Timeless in 4th only, I actually think they'll do better than Looking for Org. And while not in the top 3 right now, I think they're the team most likely to enter that top 3. But taking those top 3 coveted spots, I think actually right now it's Luminosity Gaming, Toronto and M80. Now, Toronto and M80 maybe aren't hot takes for this top 3 spot, but I think the Luminosity Gaming, formerly Maryville, is actually a roster that's really well suited to this meta. Dante obviously gets to play a lot of these good heroes. If we're looking at a Doom meta with maybe some Zarya, that fits him quite nicely. Likewise, King and Vision, I think, are a DPS pair now. They're actually getting more out of than a lot of people expected, and the backline's really solid as far as North America goes. So I think Luminosity definitely in this top 3, and then M80 and Toronto Defiant, I think the quality of their roster speak for themselves. How I divide these teams right now, I think Luminosity Gaming will be coming in 3rd. I think they're a team that suits the meta. They could get a lot better as well, obviously. And maybe I'm a little unbiased, I've taken the unter pill, but I think Luminosity Gaming are going to be in a pretty tight fight with Timeless for that 3rd spot. But I think right now I'd give it to Luminosity over Timeless. In the top 2, I think actually the top 2 is pretty simple in many ways. I think Toronto Defiant are ultimately just the best team in North America. I think when we look at it, the big question about this meta, if we're going to be playing a lot of Tracer and Echo, was, is Merrick going to get any value? Is he going to be able to be on his best heroes? But he's actually been quite impressive on Tracer. I think Sugarfree's been very impressive on Echo. Someone right now looks like the best Doom in North America. And I think when you bear in mind there's people like Hawk and Dante, who you might expect to be top of that list before, actually someone has been super impressive. Likewise, Vega's the best Lucio in America. And RuPaul on Kiri, I think he's actually been super impressive, and they maybe are just best in role in a lot of positions. But one position they probably aren't best in role is, of course, the DPS. M80's DPS, Pelican and Spectre, they will be playing on ping, which is the big caveat we always have to say. So while it's a meta that really suits these two, right now it feels like the ping disadvantage will be quite significant, and it will maybe just bump them below, especially when we've watched a lot of their scrims. While M80 get closer and closer and closer, they're still not getting to the point where they're winning the scrims or taking those maps, and I think Toronto are being quite experimental right now, which is obviously probably bolstering some of that. And the big difference right now between these two rosters is actually, I think, the way Hawk is interacting with his DPS in a lot of these situations is quite far behind where someone is with his DPS. And that's the big difference right now. And while M80 do seem to be getting closer, can they get close enough in the next couple of weeks? I'm not sure. I think Toronto are a team who've been playing a lot of compositions. They look really good. And as much as there's this really high level of talent on M80, especially when we factor in the ping, I think they just have to sit in this 2nd spot. So overall, maybe not the craziest thing in the world to see Toronto at the top, M80 at the top. The big call here is probably between Luminosity and Timeless, or maybe Looking for Org if they can do a lot. One thing to consider about Looking for Org is they're quite a new roster. So while they might not be performing right now, their growth will be a little bit quicker than a lot of these teams who have maybe been playing together in the form of Luminosity and Maryville. How much they can close the gap, I'm really not sure. I'm not convinced on it right now, but I think they do have potential to make this a bit of a three-horse race for this final spot. While those top two in M80 and Toronto, I think might actually be pretty locked. There's some upset potential here in terms of Students of the Game potentially creeping into this as well, but I do find it quite hard to see Students of the Game doing enough to get into the top three. So these are my power rankings right now. I'm locking them in. We'll wait and see how accurate I am. The group stage is going to be starting very soon, so we'll find out if this is in any way accurate. Obviously, as always, tell me your own power rankings. Tell me what you think I got right, what you think I got wrong, what you think I'll be surprised by, especially in some of these lower sections. I'm not as familiar, so I could be quite far off with these. If you want to watch any of the action, I will be doing co-streams for a lot of this up on my Twitch. The link's up there. So feel free to follow and watch that. But until next time, thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you later.